Hello again. I just wanted to make a quick video covering the news that the FCA has fined Neil Woodford and the company Woodford Investment Management over the handling of the liquidity issues pertaining to the Equity Income Fund. And because I've discussed it in the book and I discussed it in some of these videos, and there's some common themes that I just wanted to draw your attention to. With regards to the name of this video, I just wanted to quote from a song by Go West, "We Close Our Eyes," which was released in, I think, 1985. So I'm showing my age there. But if you just listen, then I think you'll kind of capture the beat, hopefully. We close our eyes, we never lose a game. Imagination never lets us take the blame. And I think that's what encapsulates for me this conflict of interest between the regulator and the regulator as a prosecutor, so the regulator-prosecutor model. Now, going back to the issues around Woodford, when I first started my financial services career in January 2000, and right away through the early part of my career, Neil Woodford was a star fund manager, and not without good reason either. He had a outstanding performance record and was very high profile and much respected. When he sort of broke away from Invesco and established his own company, when I was working at Burton at the time, and we did look at this particular fund, the Equity Income Fund, because he'd obviously managed a successful version, although within very different risk parameters at Invesco. And as I covered in a previous video, I'm not being sanctimonious here. I'm not pretending to be better than anyone else. I'm certainly nothing special. I haven't got every decision right in my career. I wish I had. But the one thing that sort of concerned me was the composition of the fund, because and this is just my opinion. I mean, I'm not suggesting he did anything wrong, because he would have had approval for this fund. And my experience of this fund when I used to monitor it is, he tried to be very transparent, and I have not got all the facts, but I don't think he set out to do anything wrong. But one thing that concerned me is it was kind of like a blend of high yielding listed equities, and you had a tail of private investments, almost like what we'd term now private assets. And there's many ways in which you can manage an equity income fund. And I won't go through them all. You've seen many versions of it, but for what it's worth, I always think the best way to do it is to probably blend together higher but sustainably yielding stocks with a portion of stocks that are lower yielding, but they are growing their dividends at a faster pace. High cover levels and so on, and I think that gives quite a nice blend. That's just my opinion. Now, the other thing as well is if you've got an equity income fund, particularly when at the time when this was launched, when interest rates were very, very low, and yields on other investments similarly low, that you got, not all investors, but many would have been investing in this to supplement an income. I mean, there will be others who were investing on a total return basis and looking to reinvest the income via accumulation units. But there would have been people who, and I think they've been covered in the news and in other outlets, where they're investing to supplement their income, whether it be retirement or through illness or whatever the case may be. And I think in that situation, when you're managing a fund like that, it's better to stick with liquid assets. Now, I was a bit concerned that whether there was enough resources at the company to do what they're doing. Because if you imagine, even if you manage their portfolio of 60 listed equities, within an equity income structure, that's a lot of companies to track in great detail. And then you're going to need a reservoir of ideas underneath them, so you can replace those that meet your fair value, yield drops, operational disappointments, and so on. So you're going to need to cover a lot of stocks, and that's not easy to do. But then if you add that to a tale of private investments, where there's very scant flow of information, liquidity is very challenging, valuations are very subjective, then I think that requires even more resource. You have to go into a lot more detail, because these companies tend to be premised on academic research and so on and so forth, and you have to go very deep into that to make sure it can't be challenged and it's viable and so on, and how it gets to commerciality. And I couldn't see how that was going to, how there was enough resources to do that, and whether really you almost got two incompatible funds in one. That was my conclusion. But nevertheless, he would have received, I assume, approval to do that. And as I said, I remember the sales chap who used to call on us was a very pleasant guy, and he arranged for us to have a login on the Woodford website, and you could see all the holdings, so you could see it there. So he wasn't, the way I recall, trying to hide anything at all. That access had to be pulled during the times when liquidity really became challenging. But that was to protect investors, because clearly if you're unwinding positions, you don't want to advertise everywhere what they are, because people will use that against you. And the other thing to bear in mind as well is the listed part of the portfolio, as I recall it, had quite a cyclical value bias to the UK economy. Again, nothing wrong with that. With that, I mean, we all take our positions and see things as we do, but it was in that period, and the FCA quote this, between 2017 and 2019, where they sort of accuse, make suggestions that liquidity wasn't managed as well as it should have been. I haven't got the facts to really challenge that, but it was in that period where UK was in political deadlock. It was after the infamous referendum of 2016, and Parliament fell into sort of deadlock. Parliament was trying to undermine the democratic principles of the vote. Theresa May was greatly mishandling the negotiations. Michel Barnier and his team were running rings around her, and the UK didn't stand out as a good destination for investments, and as the market was moving towards global equity investing anyway, and more assets are flowing to the United States, it was a strategy that really struggled. I can understand in some ways how he thought that many of the companies he was holding on a listed basis were good value. I think there were some accounting issues which didn't help from memory. And unfortunately, that led to difficult performance, and then you get like a negative momentum, because people then want to withdraw their assets, and then you can run into liquidity issues, and as they don't really describe very well in the FCA's press release, but you obviously have to sell your more liquid investments to meet those outflows. Personally, I think if you were going to run this structure, and I don't think they were particularly compatible, the equity income part and private equity / private assets part, you really would have needed to do it in a closed-ended structure, or something with restricted withdrawals, such as an LTAF possibly would have done it, although I personally wouldn't have blended the strategies together, and therefore the situation deteriorated. Now, I don't think Neil Woodford would have gone out of his way to do any harm. I think he, as I said, I have my views on the structure of it. I don't, I'm not suggesting he did anything wrong. He would have had approval for it. I think market conditions turn against him, and you put the two together, and you end up with a very difficult situation. And I would be surprised in that situation if he hadn't have done all his very best to try to manage a difficult situation in the best interests of his investors. So I was surprised by that. Again, I don't have the facts. He didn't strike me as somebody that would deliberately go against the interests of investors. But let's go back to this. I mean, you had something where he was authorized to do what he was doing up until the issues really started to unravel. My experience of it was he was very transparent. So where is the accountability in terms of the regulator, the FCA, saying, well, what about your supervision of this? And what about how you sort of oversaw this difficult process and saw it unravel as well, given that you could have seen even more than what I could have seen? And that is the issue, is you have this regulator, you have this prosecutor, and you end up with this, what I call this hierarchy of greed, where when there's some sort of scandal, we default into this first priority, protect the reputation of the regulator. Second priority is the vast remuneration of legal professionals, and the third is whatever's left for the victims, those who suffer losses. And until you unwind that conflict of interest between your regulator and your regulator working as a prosecutor, you'll continue to get these issues. And I think you'll see exactly the same issues here when the WealthTech situation rolls on, and if it goes to trial and so on and so forth. You will see the same situation where the FCA will sling mud, try to sort of hold a number of institutions to account for failures, and maybe fine them, censor them, whatever they might do, might ban individuals, but it's never their fault. It's always the go west, we close our eyes. Imagination won't ever let us take the blame, and until we see that change, we will continue to roll into these crises, because you can see Woodford was swept up with this. Everything's all right now. We've transformed the organisation, and all these issues are historic. But there's never any mechanism to check whether that is actually a fact. And you roll from your crisis to your crisis. They hide behind prejudice, and you can never get to the source of accountability. I don't suggest that the FCA again set out to do any harm to anybody, but they have to take their share of the blame on this in terms of supervision. They're obviously not willing to do it. Until you get that accountability, until you say you should have done this better as well, and independent people doing that, and them not rolling up to Parliament and giving an easy ride because the government are pushing through a secondary objective. It has to be genuine accountability, and until we get that, you'll continue to see financial crises occur. That's it for now. Take care.